The Vietnam War was a long and bloody conflict that left deep scars on American society. From 1965 to 1973, young American soldiers fought a tough guerrilla war against communist forces in Vietnam. This unfamiliar style of combat, far from home, exposed them to dangers unlike anything the U.S. military had faced before. Regardless of the reasons for the war, the human cost was immense, with millions of lives lost, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire. But what if there's more to the story? What if the U.S. government wasn't entirely forthcoming about the war? Come along as we delve into the hidden truths about the Vietnam War that were kept secret by the U.S. government. Uncovering Vietnam's darkest hours. The Vietnam War is filled with chilling stories of human rights abuses and wartime atrocities. One of the most grim is the story of Tiger Force, a small elite unit from the 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. Their brutal acts went largely unnoticed and unpunished for decades. Tiger Force was initially created to be a highly mobile reconnaissance unit skilled in jungle warfare. They gained a reputation for extreme ferocity during 1967. That year, in the jungles and hamlets of the Central Highlands, they committed shocking atrocities against Vietnamese civilians. These acts included the indiscriminate killing of unarmed men, women, and children, mutilation of bodies, and other horrific violence. Some American servicemen who witnessed these actions reported them to the military chain of command. The U.S. Army began investigating Tiger Force's activities in 1971, spurred by veterans who courageously spoke out. This investigation lasted 4.5 years, the longest of the Vietnam War. It reportedly found evidence of war crimes, including murder, assault, and torture, identifying 18 members of Tiger Force as suspects in 20 war crime cases. However, these findings were buried within the Pentagon bureaucracy, and no criminal charges were ever brought against the soldiers. The silence surrounding the Tiger Force's actions remained until 2003, when the Toledo Blade newspapers conducted an extensive investigation. Through a series of articles, the Blade revealed the Army's original findings and interviewed both Tiger Force veterans and Vietnamese survivors. These articles painted a disturbing picture of a military unit operating with near impunity and a government more focused on covering up scandals than ensuring accountability. The Blade's investigation provoked public outrage and led to calls for a renewed inquiry into Tiger Force's actions. However, the Department of Defense declined to reopen the case, citing the passage of time and the death of key witnesses. As a result, the Tiger Force case remains a dark chapter of the Vietnam War with little official recognition or justice. It also highlights the crucial role of independent journalism in uncovering the truth. Without the Toledo Blade's reporting, Tiger Force's atrocities might have remained hidden forever. Similarly, on the morning of March the 16th of 1968, a tragic event in the Vietnam War occurred, known as the My Lai Massacre. In a small hamlet called My Lai, American soldiers from Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, set out on a search and destroy mission that ended in severe bloodshed and moral wrongdoing. Under the command of Lieutenant William Calley, the soldiers were told that the villagers were Viet Cong sympathizers and were ordered to eliminate them. The massacre resulted in the deaths of between 347 and 504 unarmed civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. Most victims were shot, but there were also reports of sexual abuse, torture, and mutilation. Initially, the U.S. Army tried to cover up the massacre, describing it as a successful attack on enemy combatants. The Army's after-action report falsely claimed that 128 Viet Cong had been killed, omitting any mention of civilian casualties. However, rumors of the massacre began to spread within the military and beyond. A year later, the truth started to come out, largely due to the brave actions of helicopter pilot Hugh Thompson Jr., who witnessed the atrocities from the air and reported them to his superiors, prompting the first internal investigation. Despite initial dismissals, persistent efforts by Thompson and others, including investigative journalist Seymour Hersh, eventually forced the Army to take action. The Army charged Lieutenant Calley and 25 other officers and enlisted men in connection with the massacre and its cover-up. However, many saw the court-martial as an attempt to blame a few individuals for a broader problem. Calley was the only one convicted, and his life sentence was reduced on appeal. He ultimately served only 3.5 years under house arrest. While exposing the My Lai Massacre was a pivotal moment in the Vietnam War and U.S. military history, many believe justice was never fully served. Additionally, some speculate that My Lai was not an isolated incident, but part of a wider pattern of disregard for civilian lives during the conflict. Agent Orange's toxic legacy. Operation Phoenix, also known as Phung Quang by the Vietnamese, was another controversial program conducted by the United States CIA during the Vietnam War. Its initial goal was to disrupt the Viet Cong's infrastructure and neutralize its members. However, the program soon gained notoriety due to numerous alleged human rights abuses, becoming a major point of concern. Launched in 1967, the Phoenix program consolidated existing counterinsurgency efforts into one operation. It aimed to identify and neutralize the VC shadow government, often referred to as the Viet Cong infrastructure. The term neutralize was a euphemism for capturing, converting, or killing. The operation used controversial methods, including conventional military attacks, a network of informants, secret detention centers, and extrajudicial executions. Unlike traditional military operations, Phoenix targeted civilians involved in the VCI rather than uniformed combatants. Initially, the U.S. government and military dismissed allegations of abuses as communist propaganda. However, increasing evidence revealed a troubling picture. Official responses varied between denial and justification, part of a broader effort to control the Vietnam War narrative and maintain support both domestically and internationally. The full extent of Operation Phoenix's activities emerged gradually, mainly due to investigative journalism. Journalist Douglas Valentine played a significant role, publishing the Phoenix program after extensive interviews and research exposing the operation's dark aspects to the public. These revelations shocked the American public and fueled growing disillusionment with the war, sparking ongoing debates about the ethical boundaries of counterinsurgency efforts. Despite the controversy, no official investigation or accountability for the alleged abuses has been established. Many individuals involved in the program, including those accused of overseeing human rights abuses, went on to have successful careers in the U.S. government and military. Furthermore, some argue that the strategies and methods of the Phoenix program have influenced subsequent U.S. counterterrorism and counterinsurgency efforts, particularly in Iraq and Afghanistan. During the Vietnam War, the U.S. military started Operation Ranch Hand. This secret mission aimed to destroy the dense vegetation that hid the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces. The operation involved spraying large amounts of herbicides, especially Agent Orange, a chemical named for the orange stripe on its containers. About 20 million gallons of this herbicide was sprayed over 10% of South Vietnam, affecting around 4.8 million Vietnamese people. The environmental and health impacts of Agent Orange were severe. Rivers and forests became barren, and crops crucial for food and the economy were destroyed, causing widespread hunger and malnutrition. The chemical also had serious health effects. Many Vietnamese civilians and soldiers, along with American troops, were exposed to it, leading to skin and lung diseases, cancers, and severe birth defects in future generations. Many of these health issues were not officially recognized as related to Agent Orange exposure until many years later. Eventually, the truth started to come out. Independent research and investigative journalism, along with pressure from veterans groups, revealed the extent of the disaster. In 1991, the U.S. government passed the Agent Orange Act, which acknowledged the link between exposure and certain diseases and provided disability compensation for affected veterans. However, full recognition and compensation for all those affected remain incomplete. The U.S. government has not fully accepted responsibility for the health and environmental damage in Vietnam, offering only limited help and cleanup efforts. Many veterans still struggle to get proper medical care and compensation for their health problems related to Agent Orange. the covert bombing campaigns that shaped Southeast Asia. Another major yet often overlooked aspect was the covert war in Laos from 1964 to 1973, directed by the CIA. The United States carried out a massive bombing campaign, making Laos one of the most bombed countries per person in history. This secret war, hidden from the American public and Congress, drastically altered the landscape and society of this neutral country. The bombing in Laos was part of a larger CIA-led effort to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the supply route for North Vietnam that ran through Laos, and to support the Royal Lao government against the Pathet Lao Communist movement. This campaign, called Operation Barrel Roll, began in 1964 and intensified, peaking between 1968 and 1973. The relentless bombing killed tens of thousands of Laotians, displaced hundreds of thousands, and left much of the country littered with unexploded ordnance, especially cluster bombs, which continue to harm people today. The U.S. government denied involvement in Laos for many years. It wasn't until 1970, 6 years after the bombing started, that the Nixon administration publicly acknowledged the operation. Even then, the scale and impact were downplayed, and full details only emerged later through declassified documents, survivor testimonies, and journalistic investigations. These revelations exposed not only the vast extent of the bombing, but also the troubling bypass of democratic oversight in foreign policy. The legacy of this secret war still affects Laos. Although there have been efforts by the U.S. government and internal organizations to clear UXOs and aid victims, progress is slow, and resources are considered inadequate for the scale of the problem. In the shadow of the Vietnam War, another covert operation, Operation Menu, took place. This hidden chapter saw the United States conduct a secret bombing campaign in Cambodia, a neutral country, to disrupt North Vietnamese and Viet Cong supply routes and bases. Operation Menu, spanning from March of 1969 to May of 1970, was conducted without the U.S. Congress's knowledge or approval and was kept secret from the American public. The campaign targeted the Ho Chi Minh Trail sections in eastern Cambodia and the sanctuaries of communist forces within Cambodia's borders. President Richard Nixon and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, authorized the campaign. The U.S. dropped an enormous 540,000 tons of bombs on Cambodia, resulting in significant civilian casualties, with estimates ranging from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands. The American public and Congress only learned about the secret bombing in 1973 when investigative journalist Seymour Hersh broke the story. The disclosure sparked controversy, leading to a constitutional crisis and public protest, prompting Congress to pass the War Powers Act in 1973 to restrict the president's ability to conduct military actions without congressional approval. The secret bombings had profound effects on Cambodia, contributing to the country's destabilization and the rise of the Khmer Rouge, the brutal regime responsible for one of the worst genocides of the 20th century. The legacy of Operation Menu highlights the need for oversight and accountability in military action, the dangers of excessive secrecy in foreign policy, and the potential human cost of such operations. The fallout of the Pentagon Papers. One of the big discoveries about how the U.S. government acted during the Vietnam War wasn't from a battle report, but from a very long, secret study called the Pentagon Papers. This huge document talked about how the U.S. got involved in Vietnam from 1945 to 1967. It showed that the government had been lying over 4 different presidencies. The Pentagon Papers were started in 1967 by Robert McNamara, who was the U.S. Secretary of Defense then. They were meant to be a complete history of the U.S. and Vietnam, but these papers were kept secret, hidden from the public and most of the government until 1971. That's when Daniel Ellsberg, who studied military stuff, leaked them to the media like the New York Times. This caused many arguments. The Nixon government tried to stop the papers from being published but lost in court. This was a big deal for press freedom. When the Pentagon Papers came out, people got even more against the war, and they started to trust the government less. They also helped make a law in 1973 to limit how much power the president has to send troops without Congress saying okay. Even though the Pentagon Papers were a big deal, not much happened to the people who lied. No one in the government got in trouble, and Daniel Ellsberg's case got dropped because the government had done some bad things. The whole situation showed how important a free press is in a country like ours and why the government needs to be open and responsible. It also reminded us that sometimes only leaks can show the truth, which is why we need to watch out for government power and keep things fair and clear for everyone. During the Vietnam War, there was a military operation called Speedy Express that lasted for 6 months, from December of 1968 to May of 1969. It was done by the U.S. 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta. The goal was to stop the Viet Cong from getting resources and support. However, this operation caused many civilian deaths. They used weapons like artillery and air power, and they had areas where anything moving was seen as a target. This led to many innocent people getting killed. Even though this was known, the U.S. government and military didn't investigate properly or take responsibility. They ignored reports about civilian deaths being high, and no one was punished. This shows they didn't care much about non-American lives and were more focused on showing success by counting how many enemies they killed. The cover-up of civilian deaths during Speedy Express is part of a larger pattern of hiding the truth during the Vietnam War. It shows how the government tried to make the war seem better than it was, even though many people at home didn't support it. Overall, Speedy Express highlights the need for honesty and accountability in military actions, and it makes us think about how much we value human life during war. A false justification for conflict. A crucial point in the U.S. escalation of the Vietnam War revolved around misinformation and misrepresentation, notably seen in the Gulf of Tonkin incident in August of 1964. The U.S. government claimed that 2 U.S. naval destroyers were attacked by North Vietnamese vessels in international waters. This alleged attack, presented as unprovoked, became the basis for a significant military escalation by the U.S. On August 2nd of 1964, the destroyer USS Maddox was said to have been attacked by North Vietnamese patrol boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. 2 days later, on August 4th, a second attack involving both the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy was reported. However, doubts about the veracity of this second attack existed even at the time. These doubts were not publicly disclosed nor presented to Congress when it voted on the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. Instead, a narrative of unprovoked aggression was promoted, providing a false justification for war. It wasn't until later, amid increasing disillusionment with the war, that the truth about the Gulf of Tonkin incident started to surface. The misrepresentation of these events and the subsequent deception of Congress and the public exemplify the manipulation of information for political and military purposes. This manipulation led to a significant escalation of a war that lasted over a decade, causing immense loss of life and profound social and political unrest. The legacy of the Gulf of Tonkin incident serves as a stark reminder of the importance of governmental transparency and the dangers of unchecked executive power. It emphasizes the need for critical analysis and skepticism, especially when governmental narratives are used to justify military actions and potential loss of life. The aftermath of the Vietnam War deeply affected American soldiers, leaving lasting effects on their physical and mental well-being. Unfortunately, the U.S. government's failure to adequately address the health needs of these veterans upon their return is a regrettable aspect of this period. From enduring post-traumatic stress disorder to grappling with the physical repercussions of Agent Orange exposure, many Vietnam veterans faced ongoing challenges, often without proper recognition or understanding of their experiences. The psychological toll of the Vietnam War on returning soldiers was profound. Exposed to the horrors of combat and often met with hostility upon returning home, many veterans struggled with severe emotional and mental distress. However, it wasn't until 1980, several years after the war's end, that PTSD was officially recognized as a diagnosable condition, thanks largely to the advocacy efforts of Vietnam veterans and mental health professionals. Despite this recognition, the provision of mental health services for veterans remained inadequate, with long waiting times, limited specialized services, and stigma hindering access to quality care through the Department of Veterans Affairs. On the physical front, exposure to Agent Orange and other defoliants used during the war led to a range of serious health issues, including cancers and neurological disorders. Yet, the government's response to these health concerns was sluggish, requiring years of lobbying by veterans groups to acknowledge the link between Agent Orange and veterans' health problems. Even after this acknowledgement, the journey for compensation and treatment was challenging, with many veterans facing delays or inadequate support from the VA. This neglect and delayed response had dire consequences, contributing to increased homelessness, substance abuse, and suicide rates among Vietnam veterans, issues that still persist today. Despite these challenges, many Vietnam veterans have demonstrated remarkable resilience by contributing positively to their communities, advocating for veterans' rights, and working to improve support systems for future generations of veterans. Their experiences and the government's response to them highlight crucial lessons about the true cost of the war, the necessity of accountability, and the enduring effects of military service on those who serve.